Greetings to everyone. Welcome to Datagaps webinar. I am Pooja Gupta, Growth Marketing Manager at Datagaps, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, we have a couple of quick housekeeping comments. First, we have muted all mics to avoid unintended distractions. Next, the chat room is open so that you can interact with us through the chat. And finally, at the end of the session, we will open it up for Q&A. Today in this webinar, we will share the secrets of Tableau report testing using testing automation best practices and how to validate your data for rock-solid decisions. On the panel today, we have David Small, VP of Sales at Datagaps, and Subhanshu Dikshit, Product Manager at Datagaps. And here is our agenda for today's webinar. So we'll start with a quick overview of Datagaps and DataOps suite and why Datagaps BI Validator is a new age or an advanced Tableau testing automation tool for regression and stress testing. Next, we will share how Datagaps BI Validator simplifies data-related issues and anomalies with its metadata feature. Thereafter, Dave will share real-world case studies and success stories exhibiting the transformative impact of Tableau testing automation with Datagaps BI Validator. And this will be followed by our Q&A session. We have included a couple of polls which will reflect in the middle of the session, and we would request every attendee to share their feedback by answering poll questions. And now I hand this over to Dave. Dave, stage is all yours.
All right, thank you, Pooja, and thank you, everyone, for attending this session. We greatly appreciate it. We have a short presentation that we'll go through today, and just sort of setting the stage of what Datagaps is all about and how we might be able to help you and your organization. We've been in this business for over 11 years, and we're getting a lot of calls about business intelligence testing, especially in Tableau and also Power BI, and some migrating from Tableau to Power BI or the other way as well. So the thing that is always amazing to me is that we spend a lot of money setting up your data analytics platform, but we never really have tested it in the same rigor or fashion as we do in application development. I think that is very much starting to change. And according to Gartner, poor data quality costs companies $12.9 million every year. And then Gartner suggests that somewhere between 70–80% of all BI projects result in failure. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them has to do with the testing and the data quality. It could have to do with poor understanding of your business intelligence landscape. It also could be incomplete requirements and changing requirements, the inability to pivot and change directions, not being agile enough in your approach and such. But one of the things that we see a lot is it has to do with poor data integrity, not just poor data quality, but poor data integrity. So really shouldn't start a BI project until you have processes in place to validate the end-to-end data journey that's ultimately going to be ended up in your data analytics platform. So quality is extremely important and came from an organization where they said that investing in cutting-edge business intelligence solution only to fuel it with poor data quality is like building a skyscraper on sand. So really the need is that the data quality needs to be priority early in the project and even potentially before it starts. So we very much believe in that approach. And so what we provide with our technology is the ability to focus and observe the data pipeline from the point of ingestion. So as data is coming into the enterprise through to consumption in the data analytics platform. So that includes validating your ETL process, validating the fact that data has been moved. Maybe you're in a Matillion architecture and you're moving from different layers and need to validate all of that information's been moved properly. Well, we do all of that in a DataOps suite. It's an Apache Spark-based implementation. It has ETL validation in it, which is also data quality and a variety of things, BI validation. We can also monitor the data at rest in your organization. And then we can also generate synthetic test data. This implementation is geared to be installed on-prem or in the cloud, but behind your firewalls and completely isolated from the outside or from Datagaps. We have no access to the data or the software itself. So an end-to-end data pipeline might look something like this. So data is coming in the enterprise. It could be flat files. It could be from your production applications, JSON, a variety of different things. And what people typically want to do is they want to understand a little bit more about that data. So one of the first things they do is data profiling. And so it gives you information about that data that continuously comes into the organization. We keep track of the profiles. So if in fact from the prior profiles, if the new profile is dramatically different or has some changes, we'll notify you as that's a potential anomaly. So at a higher level, that's one of the first things a lot of people want to do. But also, as data is coming into the enterprise, what people want to do is they want to validate that, hey, the report or the data is formatted correctly. If it's supposed to be a date, it's a date format. If it's not supposed to be nulls, it's not nulls. So you can write or create or invoke these low-code, no-code rules to be able to do the data validation and through data quality rules. And those rules get scored, and those scores roll up from the data element level to the table level to the model level, all the way to the warehouse or the data lake or however you're implementing your data analytics process. And once those scores start to roll up, then we also provide you with the ability to do data quality monitoring. So data quality monitoring could be on your production applications. It could also be on your warehouse or any other data asset that you would want to make sure that the quality of data remains high. So with data quality monitoring, if the quality of the data, the score of the data quality goes down, you get the opportunity to trace back down and rectify the situation, the problem that you might be seeing. We also independently check the data movement through your ETL or ELT processes. So what we do is we'll independently verify that the data that your ETL process is producing is what you expect, and there haven't been any little gremlins that get into that particular ETL process. And as you have, I'm sure, hundreds, if not thousands of ETL processes, you're probably well aware of all the problems that you can encounter and the need for testing that. And then finally, as the data is moved and ultimately consumed in Tableau in this particular example, then what we do is we do a variety of tests like regression testing. We'll be able to do a pixel-to-pixel comparison between a report before and after. We can compare the underlying data between two reports that render the dashboards and reports, and that'll be a big part of what we're demonstrating today. What could possibly go wrong in data analytics, right? So here we have a dashboard that's got a heat map, bubble charts. It's got a couple of other charts. It's got metrics, sliders, and filters. And, you know, that's a lot going on in this particular dashboard. But what happens is the number of dashboards that you may have to produce introduces complexity. The number of data elements and the number of reports certainly drive you to want to do, instead of manual testing, some kind of automated testing. If there's an upgrade to the application, that sometimes introduces problems. Metadata change far left in your data pipeline can cause problems in your data analytics, as well as the data ingestion, the ETL processes. You know, there's just a lot of entry points where these little gremlins can get into your pipeline and cause issues further down the road. Unfortunately, it increases the cost of ownership, but more importantly, it drives down the trust in the data, which also drives down the actual adoption of your data analytics platform. We have a large number of very good success stories that we go through. One of them is a major university up in the Northeast, and what they used us for initially was they were migrating from on-prem to Snowflake in the cloud, and they needed to validate that the data was moved completely and properly. And so they used us, and that's what they started out with. But they also needed to be able to take their ETL processes that fed the on-prem data warehouse and validate that now those ETL processes are feeding the Snowflake in the cloud properly, and they wanted a way to independently verify that. They used us for Tableau and Oracle regression testing. And then also they use us for data quality monitoring of their student information system, which is really the lifeblood of the university. So the challenge was they had hundreds of reports. They were producing reports that were outside the organization, being consumed by the public. And those reports were sometimes wrong, and it was a black eye for the university. So they brought us in, and before they brought us in, they were spot checking things, and they were only checking maybe 10 to 20% of the data. Well, after they brought us in, it helped them validate 100% of the reports that were going outside the university and validate 100% of the data, and also drove down their data quality cost by over 60%. So that's one of the success stories of many. So that's my part of the event. And now I'd like to turn it over to Shibachi.
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot for that, Dave. Let me start sharing my screen once you've stopped.
Yes, I stopped.
I assume you guys can see my screen now.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thanks for that. So now let's get started with the technical aspect. No webinar is complete without actually illustrating how our product can come into your system and ensure that all the pointers that Dave has suggested can be put into reality. So let's get started with our webinar. In this particular webinar, we are going to showcase the product. We're not going to get into too much detail, to be honest. We're going to skim through a large number of use cases that we're going to work with. But this is to give you an overview of how the product can achieve the set of validations that you might require across an entire dashboard. So with that, let's get started with the actual validation use cases as well. First thing, there are a couple of things I do want to cover before we jump into it. And let me use this particular source window as one of the lingering screens while I explain the other aspects. Of course, the first thing I want to clarify before all in the call is that the application is Apache Spark based. What this implies is, of course, that we have a good amount of horizontal scalability and that we can work with a large amount of data or large number of test cases. More on that later. But more importantly, the fact that the application can be installed directly onto your infrastructure. We are pretty agnostic, so we can be installed in an on-prem system or any of the three big cloud providers, be it Azure, AWS, or Google. Main aspect there is that once the application is installed within your firewalls, or say behind your firewalls within your infrastructure, we don't even get back logs. This is to ensure that there is no compliance issue of any kind. So reports, data sets, test cases, or any other sort of information is never really brought back to us. We have to do this as a good number of our clients are pretty compliant heavy. These includes a good amount of pharmaceutical clients, and of course, a good amount of healthcare and federal agency clients as well, among financial and holdings companies as well. So with that out of the way, let's check out the very first screen that we have kept our window on for a good amount of time. These are the variety of sources that the application has connectivity with inherently. Notice I say inherently, as we have a CData connector, a generic connector, as well as an API connector to ensure that one way or the other we can connect to a very specific data set if we have to. The main reason we bring this up in BI validation, specifically in Tableau, is at some points if the problem statement that you deal with associates itself with, well, I need to ensure my Tableau reports are valid, but I need to ensure they are valid against, say, a Salesforce object, or maybe an SAP HANA object, maybe a SQL Server table, maybe an Excel file as well. The application supports all of these sources, and for the application, all the sources can be treated as the same. Once again, because we are Apache Spark based. So in my examples, if you see me using an Excel file, or maybe you see me using SQL Server, note that these sources can just as easily be replaced by a JSON file, Excel file, Salesforce, Snowflake, Teradata, Databricks, or anything in between. Of course, we do want to focus a bit on Tableau specifically, as the connectivity to Tableau is what we are focusing on in this particular webinar. And the connectivity is quite straightforward. There's a variety of ways we can connect to the system, considering user credentials, maybe access tokens. But the method that we recommend is a direct trust method, which requires a secret key and ID from the Tableau admin, and you're good to go. The other sections also work. It's just that they have some added login commands that we'll have to import, but basically the end user has to import that we provide to the end user using our support portal. So one way or the other, even if you're working with different types of SSO validations or systems in connectivity, the application can easily connect to your Tableau system as well. All we need at the end of the day is username, password, credentials. The exact site ID has to be provided as well, and everything else is automated. You'll see that the application does come with an internal password vault, but if you want to connect to your existing credential management service, the application supports that as well. Now, with that, let's jump into the actual use cases itself and what are the variety of use cases that we cover in terms of BI validation. Now, of course, automation is going to be a huge part. So we are going to definitely discuss how we can automate even the creation of test cases themselves. As you might imagine, when you look at a particular test case, you see, well, this is pretty good for one report. What if I want to do it for an entire page or entire dashboard as a whole? So that's where the automation aspect comes into picture, and we'll definitely try to cover that in the webinar today. Of course, before we jump into the automation and other aspects, what do we mean by validation and testing the platform as a whole? You see, there are different dimensions that we can get into in terms of validation of a BI tool. There's, of course, a data level validation, ensuring that the numbers that your reports are showcasing are correct. So that's one way. The other aspect is with regards to visuals, ensuring that your visuals are placed correctly, are in sync, and the standardized way that you're working with. There's also the validation in terms of security and performance that the application can get into. So a lot of different facets that the application covers inherently, and these are just a few that is also laid out within our website that you can check out at any point. But in today's webinar, let's focus on a few of them. Firstly, let's focus on the most popular use cases that we face, which is with regards to ensuring your numbers are correct based on the data sets, and of course, ensuring that your reports are in sync, a bit of regression and a bit of reconciliation. For this, I'm going to open one of my existing test cases that I've run previously. And now let's paste an actual problem statement so it's easier to follow. Well, here I have a particular Tableau report. Let me open up the report itself directly. So here you see I have the actual sort of connections that I'm working with along with the exact ID I have the access to. And now I'm going to select an entire. So here I've already selected a page. All of these are curated examples after all. But the main gist here is that if you would like to, you can of course go into a particular work page and select your exact set of report or reports as well. Of course, as I've discussed, we're working with existing test case. And so we have an embedded report that's basically loaded in. Now, this Tableau report, the problem statement is I need to ensure that the numbers I see in these charts, these are valid. And the way I'm going to do that is via reconciliation. Of course, whenever I discuss validity or quality of a particular report, the assumption comes up, hey, what are you validating this against? What is your rule? How do you ensure that this number is correct? You can either ensure it by putting a rule on top of it, or you can compare it by creating the same number again in your database and then comparing the two. The latter is reconciliation, and that's our focus for right now. We also have rule-based validation within our application, as I'll illustrate, but reconciliation is the most popular use case of ours. As you might imagine, it's very easy to work with that particular logic statement as opposed to creating rules which are subject to change at every point. That being said, there is a good amount of observability that I will discuss in terms of production monitoring of our reports as well. So going back to our problem statement, we need to ensure that the numbers shown in these particular charts are valid. So the first question comes up, hey, how do I even pick up these numbers? It's pretty straightforward. In the worksheets, we have the numbers right there. And these numbers that you see, these are subject to change based on the filters you apply. So of course, the next question, if you think about it from this perspective, is that, all right, from a macro level, I can see that, when I run this validations, everything is good from a macro level. But my end user is not going to look at the report without applying any filters. The end user is going to go in, and as you see, he or she will apply specific filters. They might apply specific filters in terms of date, in terms of other systems, and so on as well. So how can I ensure that the data set is valid even after the application of filters? Well, that's the neat part. The application, when it pulls the data sets out, it's actually taking into account the actual filters or parameters or row-level security that is being applied currently. This is what you see right now. Previously, we were not seeing this particular number, and after the application of filters, they're seeing the change in the data set. And the best part here is that the filters that I've applied, those can also be dynamically changed or updated. That's one of the key factors of the application, as you might imagine. These are aspects can be parameterized, and more or less, this particular system can work from an iterative perspective. Because that's the end game here, right? At the end of the day, you will have 7 or 6 slicers of filters depending on your BI tool. In this case, it's Tableau, so you have multiple filters, and you want to ensure that your report is valid for each and every permutation and combination. That's the extreme case, and our application inherently supports that as well. Because you just have to define them once, you have to parameterize these filters once, and the application will iteratively run through the same test case again and again, ensuring that the report is valid, not just at a macro level, but for every permutation and combination of filter combination. Of course, for our use case, let's take a step back and let's simplify. For our application, I've already run the system without any filters applied. And here we see that, yes, we have those exact data sets which we pulled in, which were used, which are the worksheet data for our Tableau report. From this point on, the problem statement is going to vary depending on your exact use case. My use case here defines that I am working with an Excel sheet, and this is a very specific Excel sheet where I have to pick up one specific sheet among many and I have to pull that up. So I'm using this particular function. However, I have an exact example where I'm doing the same, except if I'm doing it with a SQL Server system. So here, if I go into a different use case within my Tableau system, let's open up Iterative. You'll notice that instead of an Excel file, I'm actually connecting to an MS SQL Server. I can connect to a CSV file. I can connect to a different database. I can connect to an API. In fact, we have a webinar that's upcoming where we illustrate our connectivity between Power BI and Tableau and how our validations can work from that perspective as well. So in case there's a migration you're looking for between Power BI and Tableau, and you have to validate the corresponding transformation, we have tool sets for those as well. However, in our current use case, we are going much simpler. We are going with the basic validation here. And here we pulled in data sets from our Excel file. Now, I can't just directly compare an Excel file against an aggregate because, again, those values will never match. So the main problem comes in here is that I have to create an aggregation. So here for creation of aggregation, we understand that this is a particularly pain point for a lot of QA testers. And to accelerate this and to help the end user, we have both a query builder for the end user. So they can define their very own queries, and it's very straightforward for them to work with it in that perspective. So it's very easy for them to define their very own queries, as you can see. I'll illustrate this in my other systems as well. So all you have to do at the end of the day is work with the corresponding query builder. Yeah, I'll illustrate that as well. And of course, we have an OpenAI assistant for the same. An OpenAI assistant is much smarter in this particular use case, as it is capable of working with the context. So here context implies the column names as well as the data types. So if you want to create an aggregation, you can just ask it to write a very specific query. So here I can just say, well, why don't you write me the aggregates? With the aggregates for, if you're working with this particular order system, let's just make order for sales. Again, I'm not being specific for the sake of illustration. I would like to illustrate what this application is capable of. So here you can see it just has given me aggregates, and depending on my categorization, I can give more context and update the query as needed. The main reason for this is to accelerate the product for the end user so that the end user can easily create these queries and not have the need to copy existing queries. Remember, copying will result in basically inheriting the same problems that you have within your existing transformation. So long story short, in this particular use case, we see that, yes, we have our aggregation generated using from our data set, and we have created our aggregate using our Tableau as well. Now, a quick pointer here. I am using a SQL as my language of choice here. However, the application supports Python, the application supports Scala, the application also supports a good amount of custom scripting and plugins as well. The main flow of the application is irrespective of the sources you're working with, irrespective of the transformation type you need to do it. You can do all permutation and combinations that you see with sources and processes, and then choose what type of validation you would like to run, be it quality, reconciliation, or analytics, and then correspondingly choose to save the records as well. So in our example, you will see us do all of these. Once we have our aggregation created from our data set and we can compare it directly against our aggregation created from our Tableau system, we run them through something of a reconciliation tool called comparisons. Now, if you ever done this manually, you understand that comparisons is one of the easiest ways to ensure that everything is matching perfectly. But there are a lot of manual issues here. There are issues in terms of ensuring that the column names, the data types, the data architectures, maybe the corresponding suffixes and prefixes could be added, or maybe the order of columns itself could be mixed. Or worst case, the number of columns between your data set that you have generated, as well as the number of columns seen from your Tableau system could be mismatched. In this particular use case, the application has methods to ensure that these things are mapped inherently in an automatic fashion. So here you'll see that irrespective of the column names being slightly different between sales count and sales total sales, the application has mapped them. And the application is also capable of ensuring that any kind of column name changes or data type changes can be adhered to easily. I'm switching over to another example just to illustrate this. So yes, here if we have integer versus all, the application has still understood that, yes, this is the same metric, and we would like to automatically convert them to the same and then run validations between them. Our results finally illustrate that, yes, the application has segregated your good and bad records for you. And here you'll see what the segregation implies in terms of saving or working on mismatched records. But from an end user perspective, you see the following. Well, the application has found the mismatched records. The application has even told exactly from our threshold of 0.3% that we have defined in our mapping. That's right here. We already defined it. We have found that yes, the particular data set has found mismatches within our system. These mismatches are within our threshold, but there are mismatches outside our threshold as well. These have been deemed as mismatched records or incorrect records. And the application will also find out records present only in one system, not the other, any kind of duplicates, and much more. So the application is capable of doing all of these things. Of course, from this point on, the question slightly alters to the point that, hey, now that I've found there are mismatches or there are inconsistencies within my test cases, so what do I do now? Well, the application provides you a great amount of use cases here as well. You can save incorrect records within your application directly. You can also ensure that you can raise Jira tickets within your application directly, as you see within the system. And it's not just limited to these two. You can raise Teams notifications, ServiceNow tickets, connect this particular plan to your ADO system like Azure DevOps, and much more. So a lot of things that the application is capable of inherently that the application supports right there. Now let's quickly jump into a different set of test case, which is in terms of regression. So our problem statement, if you go back to our problem statement, was along the lines that, well, we need to ensure that our reports are valid. And from a data perspective, that's pretty fine. But what about a visual perspective? So let's look at this particular example and see what's going on. Sometimes you might be dealing with a problem statement like this, which is to ensure that your reports are in sync. You'd like to ensure that your reports, be it a QA and prod, are in sync, or you'd like to ensure that the reports which were originally targeted to an on-prem system, which are now being targeted to a cloud-based system, are still in sync. The main aspect here, and this could also be ensuring that your reports, especially before or after a Tableau upgrade, are still the same. That is the use case that we have seen quite often. And we have heard that Tableau upgrades are usually a bit of a nightmare for specific type of custom reports and custom visuals, where there's a good amount of things which break up and which are not really seen directly. So an entire validation process has to go up after Tableau upgrades. And so we ensure that this process is not as cumbersome or tiresome. Here we see two distinct reports which we have to be compared, which look pretty similar on a singular side, but here we see that yes, any kind of differences, be it a textual difference as we see here, has been caught, and be it an additional difference as well. You see the market filter is not present in the system, and we have got that. Additionally, there's one more change, but it's a little more subtle that a naked eye can't really capture directly, but the application can. If we go into the ship mode, we'll see that this particular filter ship mode has been altered, has been moved a little, as you can see within the application. Not just for the actual UI elements as well. Here we are lucky that there is no data difference, but if there was a data difference, the application is capable of capturing that data difference at a visual level as well. Of course, if you want to go ahead at a pure data perspective, that the other test case is what we can work with between the two reports as well. But if you're going for a mass validation use case where you want to ensure that before or after an upgrade, a particular report has not been altered in a way that was unintended, this application can capture that easily. There are a lot of underlying features here, ensuring things such as exclusion zones to ensure that things like page numbers or any kind of false positive systems don't really creep into the system, creating false positives, as we discussed, using exclusion zones. And of course, there's a good amount of automation to this process as well. The way to create this is quite straightforward. All you have to do is define what your report A or report B is. And once again, those dynamic filters that we discussed earlier are present here as well. You can define your validation even between an upgrade or even between regression, basically ensuring that your reports are being validated at a micro level, even at this particular test case. Because here, while we have our test case right here, we have the same filter options within our application as well. Quickly cover up the other use case. So far, we are discussing something along the lines of upgrade testing. Now let's quickly touch base on regression. You'll see our regression test case is quite similar to our upgrade test case, except here in properties, we have a single use case itself. And the main difference is that instead of comparing two distinct reports, we're comparing the same report against its previous version. The benchmark acts as a source of truth. And this is what the application is going to use to ensure that the corresponding report is valid or not. So assume this is what the report looked like before an upgrade. Everything looks fine. Say on Tuesday morning, there was an upgrade, and now you want to ensure that, hey, all your reports throughout your entire dashboard, have they been altered or are they the same? So in this particular use case, we see this report. This report has been altered either by the upgrade or by someone getting in. And this is not just textual based, as you see, this is appearance based as well. It's not just the basic appearance. We also capture the loading times, the benchmarks, basically how long does it take for a particular report to load in? Is there a really long time for a particular report to load? So basically, if you were working with, say, a 20-second loading time initially, and this has over the course of a few months updated to about 1 minute, you would like to carry that as a particular failure status, because now the report has been failing in terms of performance as well. So a lot of added benefits. And of course, if there's any kind of metatextual change that you would like to capture, things such as ensuring that your filters are the same between your two versions or between two distinct reports in different environments, the application is capable of capturing those as well. And that's what you see with application of the same filters and getting the filter difference within the application. There's a great amount of user-generated content here in terms of ensuring that the end user can define their very own test cases. So if you want to add some things within the system, you can do that as well. Let's quickly cover up one aspect of automatic generation of test cases. Just to illustrate how fast this is, I can do this live. I've already done this in my previous use cases, as you can see. These are a bunch of, this is my entire dashboard. These are multiple reports within my entire dashboard. And I wanted to run an upgrade test plan. And as you can see, I've already done this and I've created this a couple of days ago. So how did I do this? Well, it took me less than a few minutes. All I have to do is get into my generation section, define what type of validation I'm looking for, be it regression or upgrade. So let's go for regression, just for the sake of illustration. I select my exact connection details, and then I get the entire list of workspaces I have access to. And from this point on, it's as simple as dragging and dropping the set of results or the web or the pages I'm going to work with. And the application is going to create test cases. Of course, the application gives you a good amount of prompts. If you would like to define filters on a particular level, if you want to define dynamic filters for the iteration aspect that we discussed earlier, if you want to define some filters for other use cases, the application provides you a good amount of leeway for that. And then the application provides you a good amount of generation options as well. As you see, we have already done this, and this is the list of test cases that we have defined earlier. Now, before I showcase how we run all of these things together, I do want to discuss one last time on iteration, because that's a very powerful tool. So just to reiterate what I meant, the reports have to be validated not just at a singular level, but at an iterative level, at a zoomed in level as well. And so within our iterative test case, what we have done is that we have parameterized our values. Here I've gone with a simple parameter of start and end date, and I want to ensure that I am checking the report, I'm validating the report for H1, H2 of each year, and do it for multiple years together. So this configuration file, while it can be automatically generated, you can create it as well. So we make sure that the end user has that choice. It'll look a little like this. The application is capable of creating this on its own, and which basically covers different type of configurations. And the application will iteratively run through all of this. And the way that looks for a simple use case is the following. So I have iteratively gone through this test case, and you will see that this has run once, but it has run for every configuration as well. So while we can ensure that, yes, from a macro level, everything looks good, everything is within our thresholds of say 1-2%, we can ensure that everything looks good even after the filters and parameters have been applied. And from the end user perspective, they don't really have to do this. They don't have to worry about this. They can define it and use it as many times as they would like. Going back to our dashboard perspective, if we are discussing that. So you'll see that we had an entire dashboard that we wanted to validate, and I have created all my test cases all together, ensuring that they're in sync. And then in pipelines, I've created my entire pipeline along these lines as well. I can define if I want to run things sequentially. I can define if I want to run things one after the other, or if there's some complex use case. So I'll just illustrate the showcase pipeline just to illustrate that, yes, you can define multiple conditional clauses between test cases as well. If you want to run one before the other, one only if the other test case has run properly or has no failures, and so on and so forth. These conditional clauses are definitely supported by the product. Of course, for our use case, for our dashboard, I just went all out. I had about 20 reports, 21 reports, and I created validation use cases for all of them. And then I ran it. And after I ran it, the one thing that I have not covered so far is that the application is going to give you a proper reporting section. So here I'm going to go into the report of this particular aspect, and it's going to tell me exactly which report has issues. So of course, there are 3 reports which have issues. Everything else is perfect. It also gives us the parameterizations and the iterative tasks that we have run. And here in this case, I see, okay, Tableau comprehensive has failed. So if I get into this, let's see what exactly has failed. So it's going to give me every sort of detail I might need as an end user. This is the exact report that I'm working with. This is the exact report page. We see that in the visual comparison, when compared against the data set, this particular report has failed. We have a good amount of mismatches within our application, and the application is kind enough to tell us exactly what is incorrect. Along with that, in this particular test case, we were also running a cross-environment validation test case, similar to what we have seen. So the application has validated both the aspects that, yes, are the numbers correct? Are the numbers wrong? Also, is the report in sync with its production counterpart, or is the report in sync with its QA counterpart? The application is doing all of this, and it's giving the end user a perfect view of understanding exactly what is going wrong at what point. Finally, the report also illustrates if everything was worked fine. Have we raised a Jira ticket? Have we saved the incorrect records in the intended location? And all of this is just one particular test case. All of this is present for all those test cases that we were showcasing earlier within our reporting section. In fact, you can customize this reporting section to your well-being as well. Here, I've created a small custom report that actually keeps track of my entire dashboard over the course of multiple runs. We see that, yes, recently we have had a few failures, but over the course, we have reduced the amount of failures itself. And I'm also keeping track of my critical KPIs over the course of multiple runs. All of this comes with the inherent aspect of the product having connectivity and integrations with things like Azure DevOps or things like I've showcased earlier, like Jira tickets. And there's a capability of running custom code within your application as well. So currently, if you're using some scripts or if you're expecting some specific integration, the application has a good amount of provisioning dedicated to that. Now, in the last few test cases, I want to cover two special test cases just to illustrate how our clients are using our product and one special use case on the observability. Of course, one way our clients are using our product is in this particular fashion, where if they have something that's analogous to a particular system, so let me just open up a test case right there. There we go. If they have something analogous to a medallion architecture, or this cannot be, even if you don't want to call this a medallion architecture, this is an architecture with multiple layers, where they have a landing zone as SQL Server. They're going to curate that corresponding data set before uploading them as objects into Salesforce. And the Salesforce objects are being correspondingly used as their embedded Tableau reports. And they want to ensure that, hey, is this particular data set that I'm working with, as it's traveling throughout my pipeline, is it correct? And so while we can definitely apply rules on top of it, and I will discuss that towards the end, reconciliation is a very easy way of capturing the differences as the data moves through your entire pipeline. And that's what we see being captured right here. We capture how a particular data set looked while it was ingested, how it looked once it was actually pushed as an object, and then what was the exact differences between these two. You can capture them. There's a few records have not been uploaded to Salesforce correctly. This is definitely a realistic outcome of that. And then we also ensure that the report, the actual number that the report has created, which is something along these lines, this particular report that we're working with, these particular set numbers, are these valid against the Salesforce object that they're supposed to work with? And here we see that no, there's a complete mismatch here. And we see that, yes, there's a mismatch between the actual transformational logic in our Tableau system itself. So that's one way that our application is being used here. But enough about reconciliation. Let's finish this up with a use case on rules and ingestion-based validation. Because one of the use cases that you might think of is, okay, I don't have any kind of this use case. I just have a report that I'm generating daily, and I want to ensure that the report is valid. So the rule component is particularly powerful here because the rule component has a great amount of use cases. So I'll just bring it up real quick and illustrate how exactly these rules work. So at the end of the day, you get your entire data sets or metadata of your report as well. Yes, that is capable. We do have a catalog test plan dedicated to ensuring that you can work with the metadata of your report, which is visual positioning, number of slices, number of filters, the exact title, font colors, exact font family, and everything in between. We have access to all of that. So the rules can be applied from that perspective, or you can use reconciliation in that catalog perspective as well. Here, of course, just to illustrate how easy it is to define rules, if I want to ensure that there are no duplicates or I want to ensure nothing is null, it's as simple as selecting the rule I'm working with and selecting it with a particular set of combination of composite key. I don't want duplicates, and it's just as easy as this. Null check is as easy as defining exactly what I don't want nulls on. So here, I don't want to ensure that my final sales, so in this case, let's go with sales. I want to ensure that my sales is not null. The list of operators here, that is customizable as well. So again, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of rule level validation. And so it's very helpful for production monitoring use cases. But speaking of production monitoring use cases, let's finish up this particular webinar with this particular example, which is one of my favorites, and which looks into this particular report and well gives the end user an example that, hey, I have this report that comes in on a daily or weekly basis. I know this report is actually valid. So I can create validations in terms of data. I can compare this against another report. I can apply rules on top of it as well. But from an intuitive sense, these numbers are going to change. So how do I know that these numbers which are changing correctly? That's where profiling and observability come into play. This can be applied on data sets as well. But for the sake of illustrations, we are doing this for Tableau reports. Here, we can capture everything ranging from the volume of data the corresponding model is working on, the distribution we see, the null counts, minimum maximum values, minimum maximum lengths, the exact pattern that we see, and everything in between. Everything so far that you've seen is zero code systems. And once again, you might not be as tech savvy. There's no need for being tech savvy to use the test cases, although we have a good provision for them as well. But the application defines this and runs this every now and then. So you get this report every day. So the application runs this every day. And after a couple of days, it might show out an anomaly that, hey, this test case has failed because there's an anomaly found. The anomaly is in sales for some reason. And within sales, the anomaly is specific to the mean. And the graph tells the entire story in a nutshell that, yes, we were looking at sales for over the course of multiple runs, and we see that the sales in this particular use case has jumped shot to 700K from a range of about 150 to 250K, and we have captured that. So the application has easily understood, well, something is wrong, and it has allocated a notification for that. In the same veins, we have allocations for frequency analysis and pattern, which basically ensures that the distribution and the actual numeric or textual pattern you see within your reports are being validated as well. Finally, if you finish up this example, the other use case is still pending, right? You see this particular line chart, this irregular line chart. This represents exactly what a realistic data looks like. Is this particular rise that I see, is this expected? And you can't just apply direct numbers to this as well, because if you think about it, think about things like flu shots. Think about aspects on those particular perspectives. There's seasonality in the mix, there are external variables in the mix. So a typical statistical method might not suffice, but hey, here we can introduce machine learning. And that's our key factor here. And don't get scared when we hear machine learning, because once again, we stay true our zero code system to ensure that machine learning aspects are also easily accessible to the end user. And from an end user perspective, it's as easy as dragging and dropping the exact specifications you're working with. Here, I'm working with the specific categorization, specific measures, and of course, cadences. Many of these are conditional. You don't really have to put all of them. And then you get access to a good amount of prediction methods, depending on your use case, as well as a good amount of options on them. And once again, we'll let the graph speak for itself. But before that, you'll see that delivery truck, which is when categorization has not failed, it has passed properly. Regular air has passed. And if you look at this graph, it's very similar to what we were seeing earlier, except at this point, we can find out that, yes, the application has trained itself moving from left to right. The application gets more confident, and that's why it shrinks its bounding box. However, there's a pulse, there's a rise and fall each and every time, because it has understood that there's a seasonality to this particular variable for this category as well. And here, the rise was expected a couple of days early, and the application has captured that aspect as well. So even if you're working with just a BI use case there specifically, and you want to know, hey, can I just validate my reports based on patterns, you can do that as well. And it goes to show the comprehensive nature of the application as a whole. So to summarize everything, the application goes in terms of validation of use cases, well, in terms of data. You can compare report against data. You can compare report against other reports or its own previous version. You can apply rules on top of your reports. You can make sure to validate your reports based on the metadata. You can ensure reports are being aligned in the correct way, the correct font is being used, the correct colors are being used. You can also ensure in some other use cases, the performance of your reports is not being hampered by any points. And we also have a good amount of security test plans that the application is capable of showcasing. So yeah, pretty comprehensive. And we have excluded this particular use case from that list. As you might imagine, you can apply observability, which is usually confined to data sets, to your BI reports as well. This with the integrations and pipelines that we have discussed earlier make our product quite a good catch for a lot of our clients specifically. And we are more than happy to have more questions and have a dedicated demo in case there's a specific use case that you're looking for. We want to tailor our demo to that use case so we can have separate conversations for those as well. That being said, I would like to pause the webinar at this point and see if there are any specific questions that we are working with. I see there are no specific questions. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the QA as of now. We'll wait a couple of seconds for that.
So, do we have any questions right now? So, Shubhanshu, I need to just have one clarity that whether our Datagaps BI Validator could handle these specific visualizations and data sources that we use in Tableau.
Sorry. So yeah, I think I know where the question comes from. It's from a question that also comes on our website quite often, which is, hey, I have custom reporting sections. My reports are not as simple as using typical Tableau only visuals. So can the application support custom visuals as well? And the answer is yes. The application has extended support even for custom visualizations. And the main reason for that is that even Tableau has a recommended way. So you can't just put any kind of visual into Tableau. There's a recommended reasoning behind that and recommended APIs, and we connect to that API itself. So our application can easily work with custom visualizations as well. Yeah, that's a question that definitely comes up from our website quite often as well.
And one more that since we are talking about testing automation, so does this BI validator could automate repetitive tasks as well?
Absolutely. So similar to the what we discussed earlier with regards to iteration, if you want to automate creation of test cases, if you want to ensure that you are applying filters and making sure the values of the reports or the visuals are valid even after application of multiple sets of filters or values, there's a great amount of automation present there, as I illustrated with a few set of examples. The main gist here is you define it once and deploy it multiple times and reuse it as many times as you would like iteratively as well. As you saw at the very start in our slides, our application has been used to ensure that Tableau validation, especially after upgrades, for one of the biggest users of Tableau, who has upwards of 50,000 reports, can be reduced from months to days. And that's one of our best success stories, and those numbers will speak for themselves on that. So we're pretty happy with our product, and we're always looking for improving it further based on other feedback and other options as well. And here's why you see this observation and other aspects of toolsets as well.
Sure. Thanks for the extensive demo of BI Validator tool for automated testing of Tableau platforms.
Yeah, Pooja, sorry about that. So one aspect I do want to cover. So of course, this is a pretty broad webinar. In case there are some specifics, or if you would like to see this particular Tableau validation use case come up against your particular project use cases, or maybe you are dealing with a migration use case, or maybe you're dealing with a production monitoring use case, or any specific use case, and you'd like to see how our application can deal with that specific use case, feel free to get in touch. We really enjoy our tailored demos, as they are the best way to express how a product works in a particular condition or situation. So feel free to reach out to us at any point. BI validation is just one of the specific aspects of our application. As you can see, we do a lot more in terms of BI validation, in terms of Power BI, ETL validation, data quality monitoring, synthetic data generation, and a lot more. So the product is pretty broad, and we're more than happy and collaborative to work specifically with you, either as clients or as partners. The one last thing I do want to remind folks in this particular chat is that we are planning to do another webinar where we'll discuss Power BI and Tableau migration use cases as well. Over to you, Pooja.
Sure. Thanks, Shubhanshu, for this extensive demo, and Dave for a very extensive understanding of our BI validator. Next, we thank you everyone for staying with us this whole time, and we have also shared our upcoming webinar registration in the chat in Q&A, which will be on automate Tableau to Power BI migration testing with confidence. So I have also shared the registration link in case you want to, if you are thinking of migrating your Tableau to Power BI migration, you can always have a broader understanding how testing automation could be implemented on that. We have also shared the link for Datagaps DataOps Suite BI Validator free trial. And if you have any specific set of use cases to look at, our team can help you with a personal demo, and you can drop a note to contact@datagaps.com, and this has been also been shared in the chat. Thank you everyone for staying with us.